The next part, when we're building up into it, is looking at the importance of understanding the risk assessment process. And it sounds quite straightforward, but there is a need to show that you manage the potential risks. So you've got your red flag, which is your high risk, your medium risks, and then your low level of risks. And a lot of people get confused with risk assessment because Veolia could have 150 risk assessments, and then all of a sudden, because you've got the health and safety title, they say, well, it's that time of year, you've got to review all the risk assessments. That's incorrect. Managing risk and the potential risks is showing how you actually prioritise your work plan on the risk assessments. It's not an exercise. It should be part of your day-to-day process. So if there's an accident, you'll have a look at the risk assessments. If there's a change of process, you'll look at the risk assessments and adapt them accordingly and evident it. So that's what you're continuously looking at. Not when an accident's happened and it's 2 years old and it's a bit too late. Risk assessment, like I said, living, breathing process. So the next part is you need to identify other risk factors as well. And this builds up into the presentation later on as well. Other risk factors could be, for example, when I mentioned about a major explosion, like Buncefield, there's third-party businesses as well that was involved in that explosion, totally wiped out their businesses. So there's a risk profile. So you could be running an organisation where there's nasty products you could be managing at that particular point, but you need to look at the impact of what other effects it has on other businesses. So you have a look at the business risk profile as well. And you for example, if there was a major event and the production line had to be shut down because of a serious event, that production line could affect the business of you yourselves, and you should be managing that risk. Is right, how do we manage that particular part? How do we get back to normal and get back to business? So you're managing actually two risk profiles then. One, dealing with the event, and then two, how do we get back into business? The next part is analysing the risk, and this is where I find this part really interesting, because when you're looking at risk, you're always looking at the what-if scenarios, and it's not being overcautious. Analysing is saying what more can be done. And if you look at new technology that comes into it, if you look at new technology, it's quite expensive sometimes. So when we're looking at a business where the term is so far as reasonably practicable, and that's the time, cost and effort, cost has a major impact on this. So I'll always go back to the example of microwave ovens. When they first got developed, a microwave oven would have been £300 at that particular point, and that time really expensive. But if you look at how technology is advanced now, you can buy a microwave for £19.99. But the technology hasn't changed drastically. They just learned how to manufacture it more cost effective. So when we look at the bigger picture in organisations and we're looking at what we want to implement to make that product safe with that piece of machinery, yeah, it could be so expensive then, but that's why you need to review it in 2 years, maybe 3 years, and actually that piece of machinery could actually be reduced in price, and it could be within your investment profile. So that's why it's important to analyse those risks as well. Again, addressing the risk. And it's one of these, and I get this in my career path quite constantly as well, and you may reflect in it in your own career path. Risk assessments will only be brought to you sometimes where we need a risk assessment. You've got the health and safety title. I'm not trained and competent. I want you to do it. But it's one of these, when I go and do a risk assessment, sometimes it's not just about me going out as the title says, expert subject matter. It's not about that. It's basically going there, consulting with individuals who've got that subject skill set, and then working on that profile as a working group. So addressing the risks should be a joined up approach, not just an individual. Basically, you becoming the coordinator and the referee of managing the addressing of risks. So we've got to get people to buy into that, and that's the challenges that you will be faced with in your career path. And as you develop your skill sets and you're going into because you're doing the master syllabus, you want to be looking at a senior role. So you need to be basically not the administrator, but you need to develop people, and then you coordinate those individuals and developing those skill sets. So that's where addressing those risks come into it. So the risk process will involve identifying the issues, measuring the issues, and you need to constantly monitor it. And this is one of the key things that we look at when we're monitoring. There's always a problem. It's only when something goes wrong that we look at it then. And then how we communicate. I've seen many well-written risk assessments on the shelves, but employees who are directly working in that risk profile don't even know there's a risk assessment in place. And that's one of the key things. You'll also find there's a lot of challenges within organisations, within certain cultural aspects of the business, when you try to consult and work with trade unions, where there's an air of caution and a bit of a defensive mechanism. And this is where you realise, where you're measuring the risk, it's not just about individuals getting hurt there, but we're measuring the management profile. How effective is the communication being fed and governed? Because that's when you find there's also issues with regards to accident situations, when we look at organisations, are they blaming individuals? But actually, when you do the deep dive and looking at the risk profile, you can see the effectiveness on the communication is failing at the top level. So this is what I find with the master syllabus again, that it gives you the opportunity to investigate and really look at it. It's not set, it's not black and white where it's simple. It's the further you dig, the more information you get. So the aim is to actually clearly understand the risks and how they actually manage to fulfill the business strategy. So again, it's not just let's have a risk assessment, I need it to get this contract. It's about the strategy is, are we living it? Are we breathing it? Are we communicating it? Do we understand it? And are we striving to drive the business forward and learning from those opportunities as well? So that's the business strategy of risk assessment process. And if you can get that right and you get the buy-in from the senior executives, and then it's communicated down and fed back up, you've got a very effective organisation then, how you manage that risk. And you will start to see your actual risk profiling changing and your risk scores changing, and then your accidents ratios are really performing well. And I'll give you another example on that, because when we look at accidents and we just talk about it in meetings and we communicate in, but actually when you say you're doing well, I always ask the question to individuals and say, right, because you're performing based on last year's performance and this year's performance is really good, what have you done to make that difference? And sometimes a lot of people struggle to answer that question. And this is where your business strategy shows, yeah, I can actually answer this question. We've introduced behavioural safety training, we've done risk assessment training, we've gone out actively monitoring, we've measured or communicating, we've not just gone out and informed individuals, we've actually asked for feedback, we've listened to the feedback, we've adapted, we've changed, and that is where effectiveness identifies. I believe that the risk assessments have been really improved because I can answer that question based on the business strategy. When you can do that, you know that organisation is working effectively, and that organisation will grow along with it as well. And it's quite exciting. It's a big challenge, and going into your roles, as you develop your roles, it is a long journey. It can be painstaking, challenging, and sometimes you've got to do a lot of soul searching on yourself as well when managing the risk assessment process, because it's getting that buy-in and development, and it's not just a tick box exercise as well.